I knew something was wrong the moment I took the second sip. The tea tasted metallic. Not bitter, not spoiled. Just wrong. But I didn't spit it out. That would have been too dramatic, too suspicious. Instead, I let the warmth sit in my mouth, like I'd done 1,000 times before, and swallowed. Slowly, watching my son's face. "You still like Earl Grey, right?" Edgar asked, all smiles. He'd even brought my favorite shortbread, the one I used to bake when he was little and couldn't sleep. I nodded and placed the cup down carefully. I didn't say much. I didn't trust my voice. It's strange how the body recognizes danger faster than the mind. My fingers had gone cold. My stomach had tightened. But I smiled, just slightly. I couldn't let him see. We sat in the sunroom, the one that used to be my late husband's pride. The autumn light filtered through the yellowing curtains, and the glass on the French doors rattled a little with the wind. Edgar was talking about the weather, the neighborhood, the real estate market. I let him. I watched him as he talked. He'd aged badly. At 46, he looked tired in a way that sleep wouldn't fix. His hair had thinned at the temples. There was something in his eyes. Restless calculation, like he was keeping score. He asked about my will. I gave him nothing. No emotion. No change in expression. Just a polite, "Everything's in order, dear." And I stood up to get the cookie tin. By the time he left, kissing my cheek as he always did, too gently, too theatrically, I already knew. I just didn't know how bad it would get. That night, around 2 a.m., I woke up with a tightness in my chest. My vision blurred when I sat up. I barely made it to the bathroom before I started throwing up. My legs shook so badly I had to crawl back to bed on all fours. My mouth was dry. My skin cold. My pulse thudding in my ears like a drumbeat too far away to reach. I should have called someone. Called an ambulance. But I didn't. Part of me wanted to believe it was the flu, or my blood pressure, or just a bad reaction to something. A bigger part of me knew the truth, and I wasn't ready to admit it. The next morning, I made myself toast I couldn't eat. I sat at the kitchen table with the windows open, wrapped in a cardigan too thin for October, and stared at the cup Edgar had used. It was still there. A ring of brown at the bottom, a smear of something on the rim. I didn't touch it. I didn't clean anything. I just looked. Around noon, I called my doctor's office and scheduled an appointment for a general checkup. I told them it wasn't urgent. That same afternoon, I opened the old secretary desk by the window and pulled out the folder I hadn't touched in years, the one with my name on it, written in my late husband's blocky handwriting. Jones Docs. Inside were the originals. House deed, bank account info, power of attorney forms, my will. I leafed through them slowly, one by one, like flipping pages in a prayer book. I hadn't changed anything since Richard died 12 years ago. Back then, I'd thought Edgar was struggling, and it felt right to give him some authority in case something happened to me. He'd seemed grateful, polite, responsible. That version of him hadn't lasted. I held up the document giving him access to my finances. The paper was yellowing, but the signature was clear. Mine, trusting, stupid. That evening, I didn't answer the phone when he called. Instead, I made tea myself. From a box I'd opened personally. From a sealed tin I kept in the back of the pantry. I boiled the water longer than usual. I didn't sit in the sunroom. I sat in the kitchen, lights off, the tea steaming in my hands. And I asked myself a question I never thought I'd have to ask. Did my son just try to kill me? It didn't feel real. But then again, neither did the silence that followed. He didn't call again that night. He didn't check in the next morning. He didn't bring up the tea when we spoke 2 days later, casually, briefly, about dropping by again soon. And that's when I knew. He thought it hadn't worked. He thought I was just old, tired, maybe sick, maybe senile, maybe ready. But I wasn't any of those things. I wasn't ready. And I sure as hell wasn't going to die sipping poison out of a teacup in my own house. No. He wanted to inherit the house. He'd have to come and take it from me. And I would be waiting. He was 5 the first time he lied to me. Told me he didn't break the neighbor's window, even though his little hand still held the slingshot behind his back. I remember how his voice trembled, how his chin quivered when I asked again. "Was it you, Edgar?" He looked straight at me and said no. I didn't scold him that day. I didn't even tell his father. I just knelt down, picked up the rock from our garden bed, still warm from the sun, and said quietly, "Even good boys do bad things, but good boys don't lie about them." He cried then, hard, for a long time. I thought it meant something. All these years later, I wonder if that was the moment I started training myself to excuse him, to explain him, to find softness where there was already something much sharper forming. When Richard died, Edgar was 34. Married, working in property finance, already living 2 towns over. He came back for the funeral in a nice suit, stood at the foot of the grave with sunglasses on and a hand on my back, just for show. Then, on the drive home, he asked what I planned to do with the house. I said I hadn't thought about it, that I wanted to stay, that this house was all I had left. He didn't say much after that. For the first few years, he visited often enough. Birthdays, Christmas. He brought his daughter, Claire, 6 years old back then, all freckles and shy eyes. She'd sit on the rug with the old toy piano Richard had found at a garage sale, pressing each key like it might explode. He'd sit at the table, eat the meal I made, and talk mostly about himself. And when the money problem started, first small, then bigger, I didn't hesitate. "It's just a little loan, Mom. It's just temporary, I swear. I'll pay it all back once the market evens out." I kept track, at first, not because I doubted him, but because I believed he would repay me, and I wanted to remember how much love I'd given. Then I stopped counting. I co-signed his second mortgage. I paid for Claire's braces, for his wife's surgery when insurance messed things up. I covered their vacation once when they accidentally overbooked. I remodeled their kitchen, even though he'd once laughed at mine, saying I lived like it was still 1982. He never thanked me properly. Not really. He always acted like it was natural, like I owed it. Over time, the visits got shorter, more occasional. Always with a purpose. Drop-ins to pick up some papers or ask for advice that ended with him staring at my checkbook like it was a menu. And me? I kept smiling, kept baking the shortbread he never touched, kept washing the mug he always left behind. Because what else do mothers do? What no one tells you about motherhood is how quiet the betrayal feels. It doesn't come with a slap or a scream. It's the silence. The way your calls go unanswered, the way you find out from neighbors that your son bought a new car, while still owing you money, the way he forgets the date your husband died. Last year, when I had the flu, Claire came over with soup and a blanket. Her voice trembled when she asked why Dad didn't come. I told her he was busy. She didn't believe me. She's 20 now, studying literature at the community college, working part-time at the library. She texts me sometimes. Silly things. Poems. Quotes. This reminded me of you, Grandma. Sometimes she just writes, "Are you okay?" She's the only one who sees me anymore, and Edgar knows that. I've seen the way he looks at her, the same look he gives anything he can't control. Mild disdain. A forced smile. Claire doesn't ask him for help, doesn't take his money, doesn't tolerate his pretending. She loves me with a kind of quiet loyalty that makes him uneasy. I once heard him tell her, "Don't let Grandma fill your head with all that sentimental stuff. It'll hold you back." She didn't answer. She just reached over and took my hand. He saw that. He didn't like it. I used to think he was simply ambitious. That he wanted better for his family. That his coldness was a product of stress, not character. But that kind of hope withers slowly. And now it's gone. The week after the tea incident, I started going through old receipts. I pulled out the dusty accordion folder from the hall closet, the one marked Edgar. I laid out every check, every transfer, every note that said, "I'll repay this by October," or "just until the bonus comes through." It covered the entire dining table. I made tea, my own tea, and I looked at 23 years of quiet erosion, not just of money, of dignity, of trust. And still, I didn't hate him. I just didn't believe in him anymore. I folded every receipt neatly and placed them back in the folder. Then I pulled out a new envelope. On it, I wrote, "Claire, open only if necessary." Inside, I placed a note. Not a will, not instructions, just a sentence. "If something ever happens to me, please know, I never gave him the right to take what's mine." I wasn't stupid. That's what stung the most. The idea that Edgar believed I wouldn't notice, that he could slide a cup across the table, watch me sip from it, and assume my mind was too soft, too worn down to feel the shift. But my mind was sharp. Older, yes, slower, maybe, but not blind. And now it was awake in a way it hadn't been in years. I didn't go to the police. That would have made a spectacle. I had no proof, no witness, no recording. Only the teacup still sitting in my kitchen sink, and the memory of its taste still clinging to the back of my tongue like a bruise. That wasn't evidence. That was suspicion. So I started with what I could control. The next morning, I put on my brown coat and my sensible shoes, the ones I used to wear when Richard and I went to church, and I walked the 12 blocks to the First Citizen Bank. I didn't call ahead. I didn't need an appointment. I needed a conversation. "Good morning, Mrs. Simon," the young man at the desk said brightly. His name tag said Brent. He looked about 12. His smile faltered when I handed him my ID and said calmly, "I need to revoke a power of attorney." He blinked. "Of course." "May I ask why?" "No," I said evenly. "You may not." Brent cleared his throat and typed something into his computer. "It shows here that your son, Edgar Simon, has active access to—" "Yes," I interrupted, "and I'd like to change that. Today." He nodded, tapping keys. "We can do that, but it will require 2 forms of identification and a notary." "I brought both," I said, reaching into my handbag. I had spent the night gathering everything I needed: passport, utility bill, property deed, and the original power of attorney document, signed and filed in 2013, when I still believed my son would protect me if something went wrong. Now, I was protecting myself from him. Brent processed the revocation quietly. I watched his hands, how careful they were, how he tried not to let his eyes drift toward me more than necessary. I could feel the question building in his mouth. I could feel his sympathy, the thing I didn't want. When we were finished, I signed the final form with a hand that didn't shake. Brent gave me a copy of the new documentation and offered a practiced smile. "If you need anything else, Mrs. Simon, please don't hesitate to—" "Thank you," I said, standing. "But I'll manage." From the bank, I walked 3 blocks south to the office of Mr. Thomas Halliday, attorney at law. Tom was nearly as old as I was. He'd handled our mortgage paperwork back in 1972, and when Richard passed, he helped me update my will. We weren't close, but he remembered me. That was enough. He looked surprised when I stepped into his office. "Joan," he said, rising. "Everything all right?" I sat down in front of his desk. "Not yet, but it will be." He studied my face for a moment before nodding. "How can I help?" "I want to review my will," I said, "and I want to learn everything I can about legal protections for someone in my position." "Which position is that?" I met his gaze. "One where someone is circling, waiting." He didn't ask more. He just pulled out a folder and a pen. For the next hour, we went through everything: asset protection, advance directives, trusts, restrictions. Quietly, methodically. I asked questions I'd never thought to ask before. He answered with the patience of someone who'd seen too many families fall apart over silence. At the end of the meeting, he looked at me and said, "Do you want to remove your son from the will entirely?" "Not yet," I replied. "Not until I'm sure he deserves it." He nodded. "When you are, call me." "I'll be ready." I left the office lighter than I'd felt in weeks. The air had shifted. I was no longer waiting for something bad to happen. I was preparing. That afternoon, I returned home, made a cup of tea I brewed myself, and sat in the living room with a notebook. I listed every account Edgar had access to, every shared detail, every login I'd ever let him use. I changed the passwords, locked down the banking apps, removed his secondary user access on my credit card. By sundown, the only person with access to my life was me. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt calm. I thought of all the years I'd spent making things easier for Edgar. All the times I'd told myself, he's just busy. He's under pressure. He's not himself. But what if this was himself? What if this version, the one who didn't flinch at the thought of watching his mother fade, was the one he'd been becoming all along? That night, I slept without waking once. No nightmares, no tightness in my chest. Just quiet. The kind of quiet that comes after a storm. Not because the danger is over, but because you've finally stopped pretending you're safe. He came again 3 days later, carrying a paper bag of groceries like a dutiful son. I saw his car from the window before he rang the bell. My hands didn't tremble this time. I'd already decided there would be no fear left in this house. "Hi, Mom," he said brightly. Too brightly. "You look better. Feeling all right now?" "Much better," I replied, my voice even. "Come in." He set the groceries on the counter, started unpacking them without asking. Fresh oranges, canned soup, and a box of the same Earl Grey brand he'd brought last time. That detail did not escape me. I smiled. "You're spoiling me." He laughed. "Oh, come on. You raised me to take care of people." I wondered if he heard the irony. I doubted it. He talked while he worked. About Claire, about his job, about how expensive life was getting. I nodded at the right moments, offered the occasional, mm-hmm. When he finally sat down at the kitchen table, I brought over the tea kettle. "Still like your tea strong?" I asked. "Yeah, sure." I poured him a cup and watched the steam rise between us like a thin curtain. I stirred the sugar in mine. 2 spoons, no milk. He took his without thinking. That was good. He never watched me prepare it. He never thought I might have learned from him. I hadn't poisoned him. God, no. That's not who I am. But I did give him something to make him sweat. A small dose of castor oil I used to keep in the medicine cabinet. Not enough to harm, just enough to make him uncomfortable, to remind him that control was not his alone. He didn't notice at first. He drank half the cup before his expression began to shift, his jaw tightening, his fingers twitching against the table. I kept talking about the new neighbors, about the stray cat that had started sleeping under my porch. My tone was calm, almost bored. It was oddly satisfying. After a few minutes, he stood abruptly. "I should get going," he muttered. "Lot of work tomorrow." "Of course," I said sweetly. "Thanks for coming, dear. I do appreciate it." He left quickly, avoiding my eyes. His car peeled away faster than usual. The sound of his tires echoed down the street long after he was gone. I sat alone for a while, looking at the 2 cups on the table. His half-finished tea still steamed faintly, the lemon slice floating like a small yellow moon. For the first time in months, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Control. Not joy, not vengeance. Just quiet, steady control. It wasn't about hurting him. It was about balance. About reminding both of us that I wasn't as helpless as he imagined. Later that night, I called Claire. She answered on the second ring. "Grandma, everything okay?" "Yes, darling. I just wanted to hear your voice." She talked about school, a new book she was reading, the essay she was struggling with. Her voice was like light through dust, soft, golden, alive. I didn't mention her father. Not yet. She'd find out in time, and I refused to drag her into the darkness before it was necessary. When I hung up, I went to the cabinet where I kept the rest of the tea and slid it into a plastic bag. Evidence of a kind. Not for the police, for myself. Proof that I wasn't losing my mind. The next morning, I drove to the small pharmacy across town. The owner, Mrs. Latham, had known me since Claire was in diapers. She looked surprised when I asked if she knew any place that did private product testing. "What kind of product?" she asked cautiously. "Tea," I said. "Something about the taste doesn't sit right." She hesitated, then scribbled a number on a scrap of paper. "There's a lab 2 blocks from the hospital. They do food and chemical analyses. Discreetly." That was exactly what I needed. I took the paper, thanked her, and went home. The whole way back, I kept my hands tight on the steering wheel, my mind running over every look, every pause, every word Edgar had spoken the last few visits. They fit together now. Too perfectly. The way he'd insisted I sign those bank forms again, just in case. The way he'd asked about my medication schedule, pretending concern. The way he'd lingered by the cabinet where I keep my will. He'd been rehearsing this for months, maybe years. But here's the thing about being underestimated. It gives you time. Time to think. Time to plan. Time to watch the other person show his hand before you play yours. That night, I filled out the lab's online submission form, scheduled a sample drop-off, and wrote potential contamination in the notes. It felt strange, typing those words about something that had come from my own kitchen. Something poured by my own son. Before bed, I cleaned the cups from the day before, his and mine, and lined them neatly on the shelf. It seemed symbolic somehow. Equal again. When I turned off the light, I whispered into the quiet, not as a prayer, but as a declaration. You chose the wrong mother to poison, Edgar. Then I slept, deeply and dreamlessly. This house wasn't supposed to be mine alone. When Richard and I first stepped onto this plot of land in 1971, it was nothing but scrub and weeds. But he looked out over the empty space and said, "We'll grow old here, Joe." I laughed then, said he was too romantic for a math teacher. He said no, he was just planning ahead. We built it slowly. Not just the walls and the roof, but everything inside. The warmth, the smell of varnished pine, the noise of Sunday dinners, the creak of the hallway floor where the varnish wore thin. This wasn't a house. It was years of scraped knees and burnt pies, flu seasons and Christmas lights that stayed up too long. It was life. That's why I couldn't just leave. Edgar had brought it up at least a dozen times over the years, each time cloaked in concern. "It's too much space for you, Mom. You'd be better off in a condo, no stairs, no yard work. What if you fall? No one would know." Each time I'd thank him for worrying. Each time I'd say I wasn't ready. He'd sigh, try to press a little harder, then back off. For a while. But the truth is, it wasn't about space. It was about history. This was the house where Edgar took his first steps, where Richard read to him every night, where Claire learned to ride her bike on the driveway. Selling it would be like erasing proof that we had once been a family. The den still had Richard's books. The recliner by the window, his spot. I hadn't moved it. Couldn't. Some mornings I'd still turn my head, expecting to see him there, newspaper in hand, mumbling about gas prices and half-cooked politics. Edgar once offered to help me declutter the place, set it like it was an act of mercy. "We can rent a dumpster," he said. "Get rid of the junk, maybe make the space more marketable." Marketable. That word stuck with me like a thorn. He didn't see a home when he walked in here. He saw square footage, appraised value, equity, a future transaction. I once caught him measuring the dining room with a tape measure he thought I didn't notice. When I asked what he was doing, he smiled and said, "Just wondering if a bigger table might fit for the holidays." We never hosted another holiday after that. He had plans. I knew it. Plans that required me to disappear. Not violently, perhaps not even quickly. Just quietly, gradually. Like wallpaper fading in the sun. He underestimated what this house meant to me. It's not that I'm afraid of dying. I've lived long enough to understand death isn't the worst thing that can happen. But I'm afraid of dying invisible, of vanishing without leaving behind the truth of who I was, of what I built, what I gave, what I protected. This house holds all of it. The corner in the kitchen where Claire used to sit and draw while I cooked. The nick in the banister from the time Edgar fell down the stairs and Richard insisted on fixing it himself, only to leave it slightly crooked. The nail in the hallway wall where our anniversary clock hung. It stopped ticking when Richard died. I never wound it again. It's not a grand house. Not the kind you see in glossy brochures. But it's mine. Every shingle, every crack in the driveway, every dusty corner. And Edgar, he doesn't want the memories. He wants the title. But I've started to think, maybe that's not how this ends. Maybe this house doesn't have to go to him at all. Maybe it can be what it always was. A place of love. A place of safety. A place that holds more than just numbers on a page. Claire once told me, "Grandma, if I ever had a place like this, I'd never let anyone touch it." She said it without knowing how deeply I heard her. Without knowing what I was starting to consider. It would take work. Planning. lawyers, papers thicker than the pies I used to bake. But I had time. And for the first time in years, I had clarity. Richard would have understood. He always said the house was for the family. And family, I was beginning to see, wasn't always about blood. It was about who showed up, who stayed, who didn't see you as something to step over on the way to something better. That night, I walked the house slowly, from front porch to backyard. I let my fingers touch every surface that held a memory. I stood in Claire's old bedroom and ran my hand along the windowsill where she once kept a row of glass marbles. I sat on the porch swing Richard had built and listened to the creak of the chain. Softer now, but still familiar. This house knew me, and I would not let it be claimed by someone who didn't. Not through sweet tea or sharpened smiles. Not through slow poison or signatures in my sleep. If Edgar wanted it, he'd have to earn it. And from where I stood, he was already disqualified. He always prided himself on being persuasive. When he was 12, Edgar once convinced me that he needed a computer for school, though I knew very well he was only using it to play games. He talked circles around me until I gave in, as if resistance was just a formality he had to overcome. He didn't ask, he strategized, and I, back then, mistook it for cleverness. But cleverness has a cost when it grows unchecked. He came again on a Wednesday, this time wearing cologne he never used around me, something sharp and synthetic. He brought a notepad, an envelope, and a performance. I recognized it immediately. "Hey, Mom," he said, kissing the air near my cheek. "I've been thinking. You know how I've been handling some of your bills and forms lately." I nodded slowly. I knew exactly what he was leading to. Well, I thought, and don't feel pressured, obviously, but it might make things easier for you if I helped manage a few more things. We could get a couple documents signed, nothing major, just streamline stuff. Make sure everything's smooth. He set the envelope on the table, casual, like it was just a flyer he'd picked up along the way. I let my eyes rest on it without touching it. "Like what?" I asked gently. "Oh, just a few routine things. A reaffirmation of the power of attorney, just to keep the banks off our backs. Maybe updating your signature on some account info. Just clerical stuff, really." "Of course," I said, reaching into the drawer for my reading glasses. His shoulders relaxed. He thought he'd won. The truth was, I'd been planning this for a week. I had spent hours with Mr. Halliday, reviewing every clause in my existing documents. We prepared a set of replacements, a complete revocation of Edgar's legal authority, a new limited directive naming a neutral third-party advisor, and a temporary guardianship clause giving Claire oversight in the event of any sudden incapacitation. All perfectly legal, all ready for signature, all hidden in the same drawer where I kept the biscuit tin. I set his envelope aside without opening it and pulled out mine instead. "Actually," I said softly, "I've been reviewing some things myself. I had a little help." I tapped the top of the folder. "Would you mind signing a few forms as well? Just acknowledgments, so we're on the same page." His face flickered. Only for a moment. Then the smile returned. Too wide. Too quick. "Of course, Mom. Whatever makes you comfortable." He didn't ask to read them. He barely skimmed. The arrogance ran that deep. He believed I was handing him keys. I was handing him a lock. He signed 3 separate acknowledgments. Each one documented the revocation of his former rights, his awareness of the new legal representative, and confirmation that he had no claim to any asset not explicitly willed. He even joked as he signed, Feels like I'm applying for a job with you, huh? I smiled. Well, I am very selective. When he left, he was humming. He thought the performance had gone well. He thought he'd tightened his grip. He even said, as he stepped out onto the porch, "One day, I'll have to thank you properly for trusting me with all this." "You'll have your chance," I replied, "sooner than you think." I watched his car disappear down the street. Then I picked up the pen he had used, placed it in a Ziploc bag, and sealed it shut. Just in case. The next day, I returned to Mr. Halliday's office with the documents he'd signed. He read them carefully, then looked at me over his glasses. "You do realize," he said, "that these are ironclad. He'll have no access from this point forward." "I realize," I said. "That's the idea." We filed the paperwork. Copies went to the bank, the utility companies, the insurance agents. I had his access removed from every channel, clean, quiet, complete. It felt like severing a lifeline. But the truth was, the line had already snapped years ago. I was just acknowledging the break. That evening, I made myself a small dinner: lentil soup, buttered toast, a glass of wine I'd been saving since my last birthday. I sat at the table alone and raised the glass in the air like a private toast. "To the version of me that didn't know better," I murmured. "To the woman who finally does." The house felt warmer that night. Maybe it was the wine. Maybe it was the silence. Not empty this time, but clean, free of the weight of waiting. The next morning, I woke up to a text from Claire. "Grandma, can I come by this weekend? I miss you." I replied with 2 words: "Always welcome." Edgar still hadn't called, and from now on, if he ever did, it wouldn't be to ask. It would be to beg. He always talked too much when he thought he was winning. It was one of those traits I used to excuse as charm when he was young. That confident stream of words, that slightly raised eyebrow when he believed he had the upper hand. Even as a boy, Edgar filled silences with noise, as if pausing might give the truth a chance to slip through. So when he showed up again, this time without the tea, and started talking about next steps and plans for the future, I just listened. I kept my face calm, my voice gentle. I nodded in all the right places, and I pressed record. The digital voice recorder I'd ordered online was no larger than a lipstick. It rested in the pocket of my cardigan, the mic aimed subtly in his direction. I had tested it several times. The sound quality was flawless. He never noticed. He sat at the kitchen table, helping himself to coffee I'd already poured. Nothing fancy this time. No gifts, no disguises. Just Edgar, talking as if he were already master of the estate. "You know, Mom, I've been thinking," he began, tapping the rim of his mug. "This house really could be something, if we freshened it up a bit. Maybe put it on the market come spring. Get ahead of the curve." I tilted my head. "Why would we sell?" He gave that laugh, the one that used to sound endearing, but now felt like a knife dipped in syrup. "I mean, you wouldn't have to deal with it, of course. I'd handle everything. Just thinking ahead, that's all." I didn't say a word. He kept going, of course. "Claire's moving out soon, right? Starting her own life. And it's not like the neighborhood's what it used to be. Property taxes are going up. You deserve some peace." "I have peace," I said quietly. He ignored that. "And besides, you've said it yourself. Houses come with responsibilities. You could be somewhere safer, smaller, a community for active seniors. Nice views, built-in security." His tone shifted. More careful now, more measured. "But we'd want to make sure everything's in place. I could help file the paperwork, manage the realtor, handle the account transfers. It would take the stress off you. The stress. He always liked pretending I was fragile when it suited him. Not when he needed something, of course. Then I was dependable, resourceful, such a sharp old bird. But when it came to control, oh no, then I was tired, fading. Ready to hand over the wheel? He didn't know I'd already stripped the engine. So, he said, leaning back, maybe next week we can go over some figures. I did some research. I even talked to a guy at a firm downtown. He says this place could fetch close to $500,000 if we do it right. I raised my eyebrows but didn't smile. You've been busy. He chuckled. Gotta be, right? Someone's gotta think about the big picture. That's when he dropped the phrase that told me everything. You know, if you were gone tomorrow, I'd have to deal with all this blind. It'd be better for everyone if we had it sorted now. Gone tomorrow. He said it like it was a joke, like it meant nothing. But it landed hard. Not because it scared me, but because it was too comfortable on his tongue. He'd thought it before, rehearsed it, maybe even imagined it. I watched him sip his coffee. My hands didn't shake. Instead, I reached for a folder I had left on the counter. Inside were some documents I had printed earlier that morning. Insurance updates, utility statements, an inventory of valuables I'd begun to catalog. All perfectly innocuous. Since you're already helping, I said, handing it over, would you mind double-checking these? He took them eagerly, flipping through, smiling when he saw the headers. He thought it meant I was finally leaning on him. He thought it meant trust. What it actually meant was, here is your rope. Tie it as tight as you like. He talked for another 20 minutes. By the end of it, I had another full recording. Clear, detailed, undeniable. His words were layered with entitlement, veiled threats, and hints of long-laid plans. He didn't confess, no, but he didn't need to. His intentions were spelled out between every line. After he left, I saved the file, labeled it Tuesday Meeting MP3, and backed it up to 2 different flash drives. One I placed in the lockbox in my closet. The other I slipped into the envelope I'd begun building for Claire. The one marked in case something happens. I sat by the window with my tea and looked out at the fading light. The sun was settling low behind the trees, turning the whole backyard golden. For a long moment, I let myself breathe, not because I felt safe, but because I felt sure. I knew now. Edgar had already decided I was temporary. An obstacle, a loose end, a number on a form he was ready to cash in. But I wasn't a number. I was a record, a witness, a fortress with stronger walls than he could see. And I was no longer waiting for justice to arrive. I was building it. One careful word, one signed document, one recorded conversation at a time. He came asking for money again. Of course he did. It was a Thursday afternoon, one of those crisp, bright days when the leaves crunch underfoot and everything smells like baked apples and wood smoke. He showed up in a button-down shirt, no tie, sleeves rolled, trying to look casual, like he'd just dropped by on a whim. But Edgar never dropped by on a whim. He lingered in the doorway with that same eager smile. Got a minute, Mom? I stepped aside and let him in without a word. I'd already made tea, not the kind he brought. Mine. He followed me into the kitchen like a dog scenting scraps, talking before I even sat down. I've got an opportunity, he said, his tone rehearsed. A good one. Could really turn things around. He always said that, like his life was one well-timed loan away from being something respectable. This guy I know is launching a real estate venture, he continued, and he's looking for silent investors. I'd be first in, so the return could be— How much? I asked. He paused, blinked. Well, the initial stake would be 25,000. Of course. I didn't flinch, didn't raise my voice. Just sipped my tea and said, That's a lot. He leaned forward, eager now. I know, but I've crunched the numbers, and with your help I could really— I raised a hand, slowly. Are you asking me to gift it? Or loan it? He hesitated, that flicker of calculation in his eyes again. Well, technically it would be a loan, but flexible, informal, between us. Ah, I said softly. This was the moment I'd planned for, the one I'd anticipated since the night I lay in bed, dizzy and sick, tasting metal on my tongue. I needed him to ask. I needed a paper trail. I needed him to think I'd said yes. All right, I said. His eyebrows jumped. Wait, seriously? I nodded. I'll help. He broke into a grin, leaned back like a man who'd just won something. You won't regret this, Mom. Honestly. This'll be the last time I ever need— I'd like the terms in writing, I interrupted gently. He blinked again. You mean a contract? Just something simple, I said. We can call it what it is. A private loan. For tax purposes. He hesitated. Is that really necessary? I tilted my head. Don't you want to protect yourself? If something goes wrong? He laughed nervously. Nothing's going to go wrong. Still, I said, for the file. Eventually, he agreed. We drafted something together that evening. I let him write most of it. It was amateurish, full of vague promises and unrealistic timelines. But it was signed. His signature at the bottom, dated and scanned. I printed 2 copies. I didn't send the money from my main account. That would have made things messy, too traceable to my own name. Instead, I opened a new checking account at a small credit union a few towns over, under a family trust I'd quietly reactivated with Mr. Halliday's help. The transfer went through 3 days later. $25,000. Marked, watched, documented. I wanted to see where it went. Edgar didn't check in after that, not immediately. I imagine he was busy celebrating, busy spinning stories about how he'd secured backing, busy being important again, if only for a few weeks. But I had eyes now, not spies, just systems. The credit union flagged the first transaction as unusual activity, a luxury watch bought online, not exactly a real estate investment. The second transfer? A car lease deposit, in his name, not for business, not for anything but image. He never thought I'd follow the paper. He thought I'd forget, like always. But I documented every cent, every receipt, every falsehood, every email he sent, thanking me for believing in him. It was enough to bury him, legally and financially, if I ever wanted to. But more than that, it confirmed what I needed to know. He hadn't changed. He wasn't lost. He was exactly who he'd become. Someone who saw me not as a mother, not as a person, but as a fading resource to be squeezed dry before I vanished. I didn't cry. Not this time. I'd already done that in other kitchens on other quiet nights. Instead, I called Claire. I've been thinking, I said, after we talked about her midterms and her new part-time job. Would you like to come over this weekend? I want to show you something. Of course, she said. Is everything okay? It will be, I replied. I just think it's time I started putting things in the right hands. She was quiet for a beat, then said, Okay, I'll bring that almond cake you like. When we hung up, I pulled out Edgar's loan agreement and placed it in a new folder. Next to it, I tucked a copy of the receipts from his spending. And below that, the email confirming his second payment failure on the car lease. I labeled the folder simply, Edgar, non-repayment. It wasn't revenge. It was accounting. And I was done letting things slide. Claire came on Sunday, just after noon, holding the almond cake in both hands like it was an offering. The same recipe I'd once made for her birthdays. She'd wrapped it in wax paper and tied it with string. So careful, so much like her grandfather, that it caught me off guard for a second. "Smells wonderful," I said. She smiled. I cheated. Used store-bought almonds. We sat in the kitchen with the window open, the faint hum of the neighbor's mower drifting in through the breeze. For a while, we talked about nothing. Her classes, her roommate's new boyfriend, the librarian who'd started recommending poetry to her, like it's medicine. I listened, laughed in the right places, and waited. Eventually, she looked at me the way she always does when she senses there's something I'm not saying. "You've been quiet lately," she said softly. "Even for you." I smiled faintly. "Getting old, I suppose?" Fewer words left to waste. "Grandma." She reached across the table and touched my wrist. "What's going on?" I could have brushed it off again. I almost did. But the truth was pressing against my ribs like something that wanted to breathe. I set my cup down and folded my hands together. "Claire," I said slowly, "have you noticed anything strange about your father lately?" Her expression changed instantly. Not surprise. Recognition. "I've noticed," she said carefully, "that he's been more intense. That's one word for it." She hesitated. "He called me last week. Wanted to know if you'd mentioned changing your will." I looked up sharply. "Did he?" She nodded. "He said it was just curiosity, but it didn't sound like curiosity." For a moment, we just sat there, the air thick with everything we weren't saying. Then I told her. Not all of it, not the worst of it, but enough. The tea, the sickness, the way he'd started circling around the house, the documents, the money. Claire didn't gasp. She didn't cry. She just went very still, her jaw tightening the way her mother's used to when she was furious. "He wouldn't," she whispered, finally. But it wasn't conviction. It was disbelief cracking in real time. I reached out and touched her hand. I didn't want to believe it either, but sometimes wanting doesn't make things true. She sat back, blinking hard. "You should go to the police." "And tell them what?" I asked gently. "That my son made me tea and I didn't like the taste?" She looked down. "Still, you shouldn't be alone with him." "I'm not," I said. "Not really. I'm being careful. I've been documenting things, talking to lawyers, making sure he can't hurt me, not in the way he thinks he can." She frowned. "What do you mean?" "I mean," I said, "that if he wants to take something from me, he'll find it's already gone." For the first time that afternoon, she smiled. A sad, proud little curve of the mouth that reminded me so much of Richard. It ached. We ate cake after that, though neither of us was really hungry. Claire insisted on washing the dishes, humming quietly under her breath. Watching her move around the kitchen, so steady, so alive, I felt a kind of peace settle over me. Maybe I hadn't failed entirely as a mother. Maybe the good had simply skipped a generation. Before she left, she turned to me at the door. "Grandma," she said, "if you ever feel unsafe, promise you'll call me first. Not him, me." "I promise." She hesitated, then leaned in and kissed my cheek. "You deserve better than to be afraid." After she drove away, the house felt different. Not empty, lighter somehow. as if someone had opened a window inside my chest. I went to the living room and opened the folder I'd prepared, the one with Edgar's fake loan agreement, the receipts, the recordings, the legal revocations. Then I added something new, a printed copy of an email I'd sent to my lawyer that morning, a formal update to my will. It was simple. Everything. The house, the savings, the furniture, the insurance went to Claire. No conditions, no shared control, no room for dispute. At the bottom, I'd written a single sentence. All previous beneficiaries are hereby removed for cause. Cause. Such a small word for something so large. I sat there for a long time, staring at that word. Then I folded the papers, slipped them into the envelope marked for Claire, and sealed it. That night, I slept with the envelope under my pillow, the way children sleep with lost teeth, waiting for something to change by morning. And when I woke up, I realized something had. I wasn't angry anymore, not frightened, not bitter, just clear. If Edgar ever came for me again, I wouldn't hide behind politeness. I'd meet him at the door, calm as glass. Because the truth wasn't a weapon anymore, it was protection. And now it was mine. The call came at 9:17 a.m. "Hi, Mom. I was thinking we should talk. I've got some things to drop off. Documents, mostly. Just updating some stuff we discussed. Shouldn't take long." He said it like we'd agreed on something, like I'd been the one asking. I told him to come by after lunch. Then I went to the closet and took out the envelope labeled Edgar, non-repayment, checked the contents again, and placed it neatly on the sideboard in the dining room. Not to show him, just to have it nearby. Just in case I needed to remember what I already knew. Then I opened the cabinet under the sink and took out the old lockbox. Inside were 2 USB drives, each containing recordings, receipts, and copies of every document I'd filed over the past month. I didn't plan to use them. Not yet. But I knew now. The more quietly you prepare, the less noise you need to make when it's time. At 1:05, his car pulled up. He came in with another smile, another folder, another idea dressed like concern. "I just thought we could make things easier," he said again, sitting at the table like it was still his. "I've spoken to a financial planner. He says we could consolidate your accounts into something more manageable." "More manageable for whom?" I asked calmly. He looked up, surprised by the tone. "For you, obviously," he said. "I'm just trying to help, Mom. This whole thing, the house, the taxes, your will, it's a lot. You shouldn't be dealing with it alone." "I'm not," I said. He tilted his head. "What's that mean?" "It means I've already taken care of it." He blinked. "Without talking to me?" "Yes." A pause. That faint twitch in his jaw again. He was losing grip. He knew it. I could see the calculation shifting behind his eyes, trying to catch up. He pushed the folder forward. "At least look at these. There's a new draft of the power of attorney with a clause that allows me to make real-time decisions if something happens." "Something like what?" He opened his mouth, then closed it. I leaned back slightly. "I've revoked the old documents, Edgar. The banks have been notified. The attorney has the updated will. You don't have access anymore." The silence was complete. I could hear the ticking of the old kitchen clock. I'd meant to replace the battery weeks ago, but suddenly I was glad I hadn't. The stillness felt exact. He sat there, eyes fixed on me like he was trying to read a language he didn't know anymore. "You're making a mistake," he said finally. "Maybe," I replied, "but not this time." His voice sharpened. "You can't just cut me out." "I didn't just cut you out," I said. "I watched you walk yourself out. I gave you every chance to come back. You didn't take any of them." He stood suddenly, the chair legs scraping across the tile. "So that's it? You're just going to hand everything to Claire? What does she know about running a house, handling accounts, making grown-up decisions? She knows how to tell the truth. That's more than you've shown me lately." He opened his mouth again, but I raised a hand. Not in fear, just finality. "This isn't a debate, Edgar. It's done." The weight of the word stopped him. Done. It settled into the room like dust. He looked at the papers on the table, the folder he'd brought, full of nothing, full of him, and then back at me. "I don't know what you think I did, Mom, but I've been here. I've shown up. I've tried. I know exactly what you did," I said. "And I have the receipts." His eyes narrowed. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means," I said slowly, "that I've been paying attention." Then I stood and walked to the dining room sideboard, picked up the non-repayment folder, and placed it gently on the table between us. He stared at it. Didn't touch it. "You think you're clever," he muttered. "No," I said. "I think I've been silent long enough." He stared at me a moment longer, then turned and walked out. No slamming doors. No final words. Just the sound of his shoes across the floor, and the sound of something finishing. I didn't follow him. I didn't watch him drive away. I just sat down in the chair he'd left empty, closed the folder, and placed it back in the drawer. For the first time in years, I had nothing left to explain, and nothing left to fear. The silence after Edgar left wasn't empty. It was earned. For years, my house had carried the weight of unsaid things. Too many favors. Too many silences swallowed like pills. Too many afternoons where I smiled while something inside me curled up and went still. But now the air felt different. Clean. Not light, no, but true. The next morning, I made toast, fed the birds, and called my lawyer. "Is it official?" I asked. Mr. Halliday's voice came steady through the phone. "Everything's filed. Wills updated, financial protections locked. Your grandson no longer has any legal standing regarding your estate." "Good," I said. "Joan," he added, pausing, "I've known you a long time. I've seen a lot of families rip each other apart in this office. But this is the cleanest I've seen anyone handle it." "That's because I didn't act out of anger," I said. "I acted out of clarity. And I meant it. I wasn't seeking revenge. That would have meant chasing him, trying to make him feel what I'd felt. But I didn't need him to understand anymore. I only needed him to stop holding the pen when it came to writing my ending." I hung up, then went to the kitchen and took out a tin box from the top shelf. It still had the old faded sticker on the lid. Christmas Cards 2015. Inside were photographs, mostly Claire as a little girl. Claire in the snow, Claire blowing out candles, Claire curled up in Richard's lap with a book, and tucked beneath them, my old wedding ring. I hadn't worn it in years, not since the arthritis got bad. But today, I slipped it on. It didn't fit quite right, but it sat there anyway, crooked and warm. Not for nostalgia, for remembrance. Richard would have stood beside me through all of this. He would have seen through Edgar years ago, would have told me, kindly but firmly, that loving someone didn't mean letting them use you as scaffolding for their worst impulses. But I hadn't listened back then. I'd called it loyalty, called it motherhood. Only now did I realize love without boundaries isn't love. It's erasure. That afternoon, I baked bread. Real bread with flour on my arms and the kitchen warm from the oven. Not because I needed it, but because I wanted the smell in the house. Yeast, salt, a crust turning gold beneath my hands. Something living, something earned. Claire came by the next day. She let herself in without knocking. "Smells amazing," she said, dropping her bag on the bench. I handed her a slice before she could ask. She took a bite, eyes closing. "You really could have run a bakery, Grandma." "No money in bread," I said. "Too many crumbs." She laughed, that breathy, honest sound I never get tired of. Then she pulled out a stack of forms from her bag. "I talked to the campus lawyer," she said, "and I have everything you asked for. If you want to officially name me your medical proxy, we just need a notary and your signature." "Good girl," I said, sitting down beside her. We went through everything slowly. No rush. I asked questions. She answered. Her handwriting was clean and sure, just like her mother's once was. When we finished, I signed. A notary, a friend of hers, was coming by in the morning. It was done. All of it. Neat, traceable, real. She stayed for dinner. We made soup and played cards, and for the first time in weeks, the only thing pressing behind my ribs was fullness, not fear. After she left, I sat in the living room with the lights low, the bread cooling on the counter, and the old photo album open across my lap. Not the one I kept out for guests. The real one. The one with the tucked-in corners and scrawled notes. The one with truth in it. Page after page of birthdays, vacations, a life built in layers, and scattered through those pages. Edgar. Not just as a villain. Not yet. As a boy. A brother. A son. A young man with promise before something in him narrowed into taking instead of giving. I didn't tear the photos out. I didn't scratch out his face. I just closed the book, gently. Some chapters don't need to be rewritten. They only need to be finished. And mine was finally becoming something I could live inside again. 2 days later, he tried one more time. Not a visit, not a call, an email, no subject line, just the message. "I don't know what Claire's told you, but I think we both know she's not exactly in a position to manage something this big. You're letting your emotions make legal decisions. That's dangerous. For everyone." He signed it, E. Not love, not your son, not even his full name. Just a single letter, like the rest of him had already detached from the mess he'd made. Like this was still a negotiation. I read it twice. Then I deleted it. There was nothing left to respond to. Claire came that evening. We didn't talk about the message. She hadn't seen it, and I didn't want her to. Instead, we spent the time planting bulbs in the front garden. October's a strange month for gardening, but I didn't care if they took. I just wanted my hands in the soil. She handed me each one like a coin, soft and patient. "I've been thinking," she said, pressing dirt into place. "Maybe after school ends, I could move in for a bit, just until I figure things out. We could share the space. You'd have company." I looked at her, her brow streaked with earth, her eyes clear and steady. "You want to live in a house full of ghosts?" I asked. She smiled. "Only the kind that make tea and smell like cinnamon." I didn't answer, just kept planting. When we finished, we sat on the porch, her hair pulled back in a messy knot, my knees aching in the cold. The sun dipped behind the old sycamore across the street, and for a long moment, we just watched the light leave the day. "You're sure about everything?" she asked eventually. "As sure as I've ever been," I said. "I've put the protections in place. He can't touch it now. Not the house, not the accounts, not me." She nodded, then looked away. "Do you think he ever meant to hurt you?" I took a long breath. the kind that feels like it comes from deeper than the lungs. I think, I said slowly, he stopped seeing me as someone real a long time ago. I became a function, a signature, a name on a deed. She didn't speak, just reached over and took my hand. It was enough. That night, after she'd gone home, I sat in the den and lit a single candle. Richard's candle, the one we'd kept on the shelf above the piano, unused since the day we buried him. I watched the flame flicker, small and defiant. I wasn't afraid anymore. I hadn't realized how much fear I'd lived with, not the sharp kind, but the slow drip of dread. The tension of waiting for someone you love to finally love you back in a way that feels safe. That wait was over. The next morning, I went through every remaining file in the house. I shredded anything that gave Edgar standing. Old statements, outdated forms, copies of documents that no longer held weight. I boxed up his childhood things, yearbooks, trophies, the faded drawing of a tree he once gave me when he was 7. I labeled the box, Archive, Do Not Return. It was more mercy than he would ever understand. By evening, I'd rearranged the entire living room. I moved the piano to the far wall, swapped the recliner for a smaller chair, dusted the picture frames, and opened every window to let in the cool fall air. It smelled like beginnings. That night I slept in the guest room. Not because I was hiding, but because I wanted to remember how it felt to claim a different corner of my own life. To choose something, even something small, that had nothing to do with anyone else's expectations. In the morning, I woke up early, brewed fresh coffee, and started writing. Not to anyone, not for court, just for me. A record, a memory, a quiet declaration that I had been here and I had not gone quietly. I wrote about the tea, about the garden, about Claire's voice when she read out loud, about the envelope under my pillow, now resting in the lockbox with my name on it, about the day I finally stopped waiting to be someone's mother and started being my own person again. It's strange how quickly a house can shift once the fear is gone. The walls don't creak as much. The light feels softer. Even the floorboards under your feet seem to settle into something more solid, as if the house itself knows you've reclaimed it. I spent that week doing small things, quiet things. I repotted the geraniums. I took the old curtains down and hung clean ones, white linen, the kind that catch the morning sun like breath. I fixed the dripping tap in the bathroom, the one Edgar always said he'd get around to. I got around to it myself. Every task felt like stitching something back together. Not a performance, not a transformation, just repair. Claire stopped by each afternoon, sometimes with groceries, sometimes just for tea. She didn't hover. She never once asked me if I was okay. She simply came and stayed. On Thursday, she brought a small brass box she'd found at a flea market. "For your keys," she said, "or secrets." I placed it by the door. The keys went in. The secrets stayed with me. That evening, as we sat in the kitchen, I asked her, "Do you ever think about what makes a person turn mean?" She looked up from her cup, thoughtful. "I don't think they start that way. I think they choose it. One small decision at a time." I nodded. "And by the time anyone notices, they're already gone." She said nothing, but reached across the table and touched my wrist. A simple gesture, steadying, like she was anchoring me to the moment. After she left, I pulled out the old check register, the one I hadn't opened in years. I went line by line through every expense, every favor, every loan. There it was, in neat blue ink. Decades of giving. Not always money. Time, presence, grace. I hadn't always had to spare. And always. Edgar's name in the margins. I closed it, gently. Some balances aren't meant to be settled, only acknowledged. The next day, a letter arrived. Not an email, not a call. A letter folded sharply in a white envelope. Typed, not handwritten. It was from Edgar's lawyer, polite, formal, vague enough to protect him, pointed enough to threaten. It requested a clarification of recent changes to estate structures, citing concern over irregular revisions and implying that I might be under external influence. Claire. They meant Claire. It was the final confirmation that I'd made the right decision. I didn't respond. Instead, I placed the letter in the brass box by the door, right on top of the keys. Then I called Mr. Halliday. He wasn't surprised. "I'll handle it," he said. "They won't get far." "I know," I said. "Just make sure Claire's not pulled into it." "She won't be. Legally, she's protected. Everything's in order." Good. That night, I slept with the window open. The autumn wind carried in the smell of damp leaves and cold soil, the kind of scent that reminds you things can die and still matter. That decay isn't an end. It's just what happens before the roots take hold again. I woke before dawn and walked the house barefoot, every room silent but present. I touched the edges of the walls, the door frames, the table Richard built with his own hands. I whispered, "Thank you," to the house, not out loud, not for show, but with every breath. Then I opened the front door and stood on the porch. The garden was dark, but I could see the shape of it. Rows of bulbs sleeping beneath the dirt, waiting for spring, waiting for warmth, waiting for a reason to bloom. And I knew then, this was no longer about Edgar. Not really. It wasn't about punishment, or winning, or even being right. It was about drawing a line and then stepping over it. Alone, if I had to, but never, ever again. In silence. He showed up unannounced, no warning, no call, just the sound of tires on gravel and the sharp slam of a car door. I watched from the front window as he walked up the path, shoulders squared like he still thought this was his to walk into. He didn't knock. He tried the handle first, old habits, but I'd started locking the door weeks ago. I opened it just wide enough to see his face, that same careful smile he wore when he wanted something. "Hi, Mom," he said, like nothing had happened. I didn't move. "What do you want, Edgar?" He blinked, thrown for a second. "Just to talk. You've been hard to reach. There's nothing left to discuss." He gave a short laugh, like I was being dramatic. "Come on, let's not do this. I think things just got twisted, misunderstood." "I understand perfectly," I said. He glanced past me into the house. "Can I come in?" "No." He flinched, barely, but enough. Then he stepped back and adjusted his jacket. Buying time. He pulled out a folded piece of paper from his pocket. "I got this from your lawyer," he said. "Your new will, the changes." He held it like evidence, like he thought I might be ashamed of it. "I didn't authorize it," he added. "You didn't need to," I said. "It's mine." He looked at me for a long moment. Then his voice dropped lower, heavier. "Are you really going to give everything to Claire? A student with no income, no real-world experience? You think that's fair?" "I think it's earned," I said quietly. "She's manipulating you." I didn't answer. "I'm your son," he continued. "You think that doesn't mean anything?" "It means you had every opportunity," I said. "And you wasted them." He stared at me, not angry, not pleading, just blank. "You don't mean this," he said finally. "You're upset. You're being influenced. No, I said, steady. I'm being clear. He stepped forward again. You're going to regret this. One day, when Claire shows her real face, when you need help. I've needed help, I interrupted. I waited for it. I asked for it. All you ever saw was an inconvenience with a signature. His face hardened. I never meant to hurt you, he muttered. But you did. We stood in silence. Wind rustled the trees behind him, and somewhere down the block a dog barked. Ordinary sounds, in an extraordinary moment. Then I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small envelope, the kind they use for receipts. I want you to take this, I said, and handed it to him. He opened it. Inside was a check for $1. His eyes shot up to mine, confused. That's your inheritance, I said. Legally binding. So you can't claim you were forgotten. Just refused. His mouth opened, closed. He looked down at the check again, like it might change. You don't have to cash it, I said. But it's real. Just like this choice. He stared at it for a long moment. Then he looked back up. This is humiliating. No, I said softly. This is honest. He didn't speak again. Just turned and walked back down the path, slower this time. Not defeated, but smaller. Like something inside him had finally accepted that the door would not open again. I watched his car disappear around the corner. Then I closed the door, and I locked it. Winter came early that year. The trees held onto their color longer than usual, bright golds and stubborn reds. But by the second week of November, the wind turned sharp, and everything loosened. Leaves fell in quiet drifts across the lawn, covering the soil where Claire and I had planted spring bulbs weeks before. I sat on the porch most mornings, wrapped in the same gray shawl Richard once gave me for our 25th anniversary. It's frayed now, worn soft along the edges, but it still holds warmth. Some things do. Edgar never came back. Not in person. Not with a letter. Not with an apology. And maybe that was mercy. There are goodbyes that don't need to be spoken aloud, only lived, like a chapter that ends mid-sentence, and you never turn the page again. The check I gave him was never cashed. I thought about that more than I should have. Whether it was pride that stopped him, or denial. Whether he kept it as proof of some injustice he still believes happened to him. Or whether he simply threw it away, like so many other things he never valued until they were gone. I didn't care. Not really. Because the truth is, the moment I handed him that envelope, I stopped being someone he could shape. I stopped existing for him as a source of anything. Comfort, guilt, leverage. I became something else entirely. Someone whole. Claire moved in the week before Christmas, not with boxes or plans, just a single suitcase, her laptop, and a promise. Just until the semester ends, then we'll see. But I knew she was staying. I think she did too. She took the guest room, made it hers. Books stacked by the bed, mismatched mugs on the nightstand, an old lamp she found at a second-hand shop that flickers when it gets too warm. The house shifted around her gently, the way homes do when the right person enters. No resistance, just room. She brought life with her. Noise. Light. The smell of cheap candles and late-night toast. I found myself laughing more, watching films I hadn't thought to revisit in years, listening to music again, real music, not just background noise. One afternoon, while she was at class, I walked through the house with a notebook and wrote down everything I wanted her to know. Not instructions, not rules, just truths. Where the fuse box is, which drawer sticks. How the front door swells in the summer and won't close without a little push. And on the last page, I wrote, "If you ever wonder whether you were chosen, you were. Not because you asked, but because you stood beside me when I stopped asking." I left the notebook in her room. She didn't mention it, but a few days later, I noticed it on her nightstand. The corner of the last page was creased. She'd read it. On Christmas Eve, we made dinner together. A small roast, potatoes, the almond cake she'd started baking without me having to ask. We ate by candlelight. No music, no television. Just the sounds of two women breathing in the silence that used to hold so much tension, and now held only peace. Afterward, she handed me a small, wrapped box. Inside was a silver pendant, delicate, simple, engraved on the back with one word: stay. I didn't cry. Not then. But later, when she went to bed and the house settled into its winter stillness, I sat by the fire with the pendant in my palm and let myself feel what I'd earned. Not victory, not justice, relief, release. A quiet ending that didn't erase the pain, but no longer fed it. And in that moment, I realized something I hadn't seen coming. This was not a story about what Edgar did. It was a story about what I survived and what I reclaimed, not through anger, but through choosing myself, finally, without apology. So here's what I want you to take from this. If you've read all the way through, you are allowed to protect yourself. You are allowed to choose peace over blood. And you are allowed, at any age, to say, no more. If you've ever been made to feel small in your own home or spoken over in your own life, know this: you are not invisible. You are the keeper of stories. The final voice in the room. The door that does not open unless you say so. And if this story spoke to you, even in a quiet way, I ask just one thing. Share it. Not for me, but for someone who might be waiting to hear that she's not alone. Leave a comment. Pass it on. Let another woman know. Her voice still matters. Even if it shakes. Even if it's late. Especially then.